Okay. Okay. So, with Tiny Forest, we have a wildlife count week, which is our focus time to be collecting biodiversity surveys. And so I've got a bit of background to what we're going to talk about tonight. So, what is Tiny Forest? For those of you who are still new to the program, what is the wildlife count and how tiny forests support biodiversity? And then I'm going to go through the 4 biodiversity surveys that we run in our tiny forests. Really, it's 3 surveys with 2 types of butterfly recording, pollinator count, and ground survey. They're quite a bit more information if you want to get into it. But hopefully, as I say, this gives you enough information to do. So,
Daniel, I keep losing you in between.
Say again?
I keep losing you in between. Like it gets a little squeaky and then it goes off. So.
Sorry, folks.
I think it might be because some participants aren't muted, and it might be having a reverberation coming back again through people's computers.
There may be. Thanks, Fee. That's right. Is it when I turn my head, Divya? Does it make a difference? It should go with me.
Keep talking as you move your head.
I will talk about the tiny forest. It is a dense and fast-growing miniature woodland. Are you hearing me? Excellent. I'll keep trying like that. We plant, as you know, 600 trees and shrubs in the space of the size of a tennis court. So it's quite a unique kind of way of creating a forest. And really, we're trying to create a forest ecosystem in our parks and green spaces in our cities. And this process was brought to us by a botanist from Japan called Dr. Kiyomi Miyawaki, who was really interested in understanding how we could bring about the regeneration of forests quickly, particularly in Japan, to mitigate against natural disasters, tsunamis and earthquakes. We have different kinds of crises in our country in terms of the biodiversity crisis and the climate crisis. So we've augmented some of his methods to try to improve what we can offer for biodiversity and people in our cities, in our current sort of climate of people not having access to good green space and biodiversity struggling to find habitats and food. So for that reason, we plant a really diverse range of species of trees and shrubs, up to 25 different species per forest, which really kind of maximizes that space in terms of the resources, the types of food there might be, the types of shelter, types of nesting habitat there might be for all the different biodiversity invertebrates and other creatures that might be found there. And the method is based on planting all of these species together across the 4 different forest layers, from the shrub layer to the subcanopy to the canopy, to allow competition at all the different levels, above ground and below ground, needing different resources, meaning it really pushes that growth upwards, and the development of the forest is a rapid process, which is really exciting, as now our forests are getting to 4 years old in the UK. We're really seeing that change over time. Those of you that got a 1-year-old forest now will, be able to see, hopefully, photos over the season of other people in the older forest and begin to imagine what yours might look like. And from Earthwatch Europe's perspective, we are interested in nature in cities and understanding how our urban spaces can become nature-based solutions. What can we do? How can we manage our urban green spaces to provide the solutions that nature can bring to some of the issues that we face in our cities? So the focus tonight is on the biodiversity element of that. And for our monitoring, we work with citizen scientists, volunteers like yourselves, who are interested in finding out about what's living in their forests. And we do this through the days that Earthwatch can run, when we can come to a forest and run a science day, a monitoring day, and help you, actually show you how to do stuff. But we also run these events, and the activities and the resources are all there for you to use at any time with different groups of people, with your friends, with your family, or just to have a mindful, quiet moment for yourself in the forest. And one of the ways that we, I didn't introduce myself, I do apologize, but I'm the research lead on our Earthwatch Tiny Forest program. So I'm really interested in the data, and I'm really interested in understanding how tiny forests work. And from a science and a research perspective, it's really important that we have data that is consistent across different sites over time. And by asking you all to collect data during our Wildlife Count week in May, it's going to make the data much more comparable, because the results you get from your forest in that week, we can compare more directly with forests elsewhere in the country if we collect data all at the same sort of time. Any data is also valuable throughout the year whenever you manage to go, but it's really, really nice to get a consolidated effort, and hopefully for yourselves as well, to share those stories with others, tell others what you saw during that week might inspire other people to go out and take part as well. So that's why we focus our activities in May. The reason we're doing this training actually in April, and a good month before the wildlife count, is we also have another event happening this month, which is 1,000,000 Acts of Science, and it's a citizen science campaign across the whole of Europe, where they're trying to bring together all of the different citizen science projects that exist to gather up 1,000,000 acts. So if we can contribute just a few acts of science during April as well as May, then that would be really valuable. And as we were discussing before, many of the forests are in the south of England, potentially. The flowering resources in those forests are already on their way over. Whereas I live in North Wales, and some of the blackthorn is only just coming out into flower now. So it's really valuable to collect data during April as well. So I'd urge you to go and give it a try in the next few weeks. So we're calling on everyone to get involved and support and help us understand how Tiny Forest is supporting urban wildlife. And you can do that by registering on the website. I don't know if Divya, you'd like to share the link just in case anyone hasn't registered yet, because we this year have a pack of resources that you would receive and some updates to remind you and nudge you along and encourage you to get involved. So hopefully you've got those dates in your diary already. Thanks. So why are we interested in tiny forests and biodiversity? So the State of Nature report, it was published in 2023, revealed the state of the declines that we see in nature across the UK based on the best possible information across all of the sort of nature conservation research institutes in the UK. And it's really sobering, the declines that we've seen. And what's interesting particularly here is that some of the declines that are mentioned in the report include groups that we monitor in tiny forests. So the kind of things that we are interested in studying in tiny forests are groups that we know are in trouble in the UK in general. So particularly pollinators, that's the case for. So it's why we focus on butterflies and pollinators more broadly in our monitoring. And tiny forests can provide homes and connectivity for wildlife in our towns and cities, where maybe habitats are too separated, too dispersed from each other for animals to be able to travel between them to maintain their populations. We plant a diverse mix of native species, which gives all these different resources and niches, and the structural complexity of the habitat, the density of the different forms and shapes of our tiny forests is particularly interesting from a biodiversity point of view, to know how does that support different groups, different types of biodiversity in that small space. And as the forests mature, we get these complex structures, which also not just during spring and summer when invertebrates are actually active, but also this refuge year round, these niches, these small spaces, these wilder spaces that have not been tidied up, the leaves haven't all been raked, the vegetation hasn't all been mown back, meaning that you've got the larvae and eggs and invertebrates that hibernate over winter also provide a refuge for them to survive and be able to come out and breed the following year. So the 4 surveys that we undertake in our biodiversity monitoring, as I said, are the butterfly surveys, pollinator fit counts, which we've got a particular challenge for you around that, our curiosity challenge. Any of you have seen the monitoring report will know about that, and our ground dweller surveys. So each of these are very simple. They don't take very long, and we're really interested to see if if anyone's able and interested to go out regularly and take part in these surveys on a regular basis, then that would be really wonderful. But anything you can do in this time period would be great. And we do talk about the importance of people connecting with nature. We know, I think many of you will feel, and hopefully while you're here today, that there are real benefits of just being in nature and spending time in nature. And whenever we spend time teaching people about these surveys in the tiny forest, everyone will comment on how amazing it is, how much you see when you just sit and look. And so we do sort of turn this around in sort of taking some mindful minutes, some mindful time just to spend observing nature and seeing what you can find, seeing what you see. And by contributing the data, by filling in a survey while you're doing it, you're creating this wealth of knowledge, which will really help us improve our green spaces. So last year, there was 12,000 mindful minutes recorded by our citizen scientists, which was really, really exciting. So I'm going to jump to the portal now. So some of you will have used this before, maybe on a science day with Earthwatch staff, but otherwise you can navigate to the URL here. You can put it in the chat just in case anyone wants to look while I'm going through it. So I'm going to go to that myself. Oops, wrong way. And when you go to the portal, you are on the home page, which will tell you all about the tiny forest and anything you want to do, and all the different ways that you can get involved. But when it comes to taking part in a survey, you need to navigate to your tiny forest. So you can go to the map in the tiny forest site, and you need to zoom in and choose your tiny forest. So what have we got? I'm going to go to Whitney, which is our oldest tiny forest. And if you go to the page, you find your profile page of your tiny forest, which I think most of you will know about. You can see how the forest has grown over time in the photos. This is what it's looking like now in year 4. It's really wonderfully dense and tall. And we've taken the fence down now, so it doesn't need that kind of protection. So you can imagine what yours will look like in the future. The first point on the profile page gives you a link to take part in the site, to take part in the survey. So this is where you need to go. You don't need a login or anything to access any of this. And you see the list of surveys here. So butterflies, 2 butterfly surveys, ground dwellers, and pollinator timed count. And each of them has a button to start the survey, to access the survey guide, and to access an ID guide to help you identify the species that you might be seeing. And it's really good to have a look at these ID guides before you take part in the survey, just to familiarise yourself with what you might see. Now, often people get a bit worried about, oh, I don't know enough about biodiversity, I don't know enough species, I can't identify things. So we've tried to design our surveys to be as open as possible, however much experience you've got. And the butterfly surveys are the only ones that require you to identify particular species. And so for that reason, we've included the pictures directly in the survey itself. So I'm just going to go through these one at a time and talk you through what it involves. So, okay. So if you click on Start Survey, the first thing you will be asked to do is complete a liability waiver and a consent waiver. Now, this is hopefully not too alarming to you. It's required of us as a matter of safeguarding and to ensure that you are consenting to take part in the survey, to submit your information, your data, and to agree that you've understood the risks of being out in the forest and potentially standing on something uneven, getting prickled by one of the thorny bushes. So I have to agree to these things, and once you've done that, you can agree to get updates, but also you shouldn't have to do it again when you go in until a few months later, and then it updates the system and you might have to do it again, but it only takes a few seconds. At any point, you can access the survey guide or the ID guide, and you can do this on your phone. And it works, it shows up really quite nicely on your phone. So the first question is, what day you do your survey? So I'm doing it today. And it asks you, I can make this a bit bigger for you. Is that easier? So it asks you a little bit about your experience. So it means that we know how to kind of classify. If someone's really familiar with identifying these butterfly species, we can be very confident in those answers. Otherwise, we might want to sort of see, do we think that's likely to be flying at that time of year? Because butterflies have different times of year when they're active. So be honest about what you think your experience is, but don't worry about it too much. Everyone can take part. And then we're interested in understanding where in the forest you are when you're doing your survey. So are you in the middle of the forest, or are you quite near the edge? Can you stand within 2 meters of the edge of the forest and then you're in an edge habitat? Or are you standing in the classroom or outside? So you can literally just tick the box to say where in the forest you are. And that gives us a better idea of where you're recording this. It's really important when you're doing biodiversity surveys to understand the conditions, because that really affects particularly butterflies and pollinators, how much they're moving around. So if everyone was doing their surveys in the rain and we didn't record any butterflies, we'd know why that was. It wasn't that all the butterflies have disappeared from our forest. So today, unfortunately, it is a bit drizzly where I am. There's certainly no sunshine, and it's a bit breezy. Now, those are actually not very good conditions for doing the butterflies. You probably won't see any. It's still worth doing it. It's still worth recording. Those zeros are really important for our data, but this just gives us the context to understand why. And then it's just a matter of spending time watching. So it's a 15-minute survey. You can move around a little bit in the forest while you're doing it to try and see different areas. Don't feel too kind of glued to the spot. You are trying to observe the habitats, try and see where there might be flowers that the butterflies might be landing on. And having spent a little bit of time before, having a look through the different species you might see, you're just looking out to observe which of the different species. And then it's simply, once you've seen one, I've seen one small white, I can just click the plus button. You need to record because otherwise, in order to make sure you're not double counting things, you record the maximum number you see at any one time. So if I saw a brimstone butterfly in my forest, I'd click 1. If I see another one later on, I don't know if it's the same one or a new one. So I can't say that there were definitely 2 in the forest. I can only say definitely 1. There might be 2. So if I saw 2 together, I could click that was 2. Okay, does that make sense? So that goes for all the surveys, and you always record the maximum number seen at any one time. Now, some of these species are a little bit more similar once you get to the kind of orangey, reddy species. So it is really worth trying to get a good look while they're observing and have a good look at the guides. We've got another, the images are on the survey, but there is also another guide that helps give you a few tips of what to look out for. And if you aren't certain, don't just guess. You can click add it down as an other species. We are in the process of making some updates to the portal, and we are hoping by this summer to have a box here that if you know what it is and it isn't one of the species listed, you can actually type in what species you've seen. But at the moment, that option isn't there currently. Right, any questions about the butterfly survey? That's the count. That's the way you count the number of each species that you've seen over a 15-minute period. And if any of you have taken part in the big butterfly count, that's exactly the same. Butterfly Conservation Run, exactly the same survey across parks, gardens, any habitats across the UK. And that gives us a really interesting opportunity in years to come to compare tiny forests to other habitats over the summer period. Are there any questions about that?
I have one. I mean, is there a way to maximize my chances of finding a butterfly? Is there something I could do?
Yeah, that's a good question. We do recommend you go out. We want to maximize the chances of you seeing them because we want to know what's there when they're likely to be present and likely to be active. So we recommend a still, warm, sunny day and around the middle of the day when the sun is warmest is the best period to be surveying butterflies. Often it's the wind that's the biggest factor. They will be active on a warm, overcast day, but if it's windy, they'll all just be hunkered down somewhere. You won't see them. Thanks. Once you've finished, you simply click the submit button. I'm not going to click it because otherwise it'll record some incorrect data, but that's all that's required. And the survey guide will pop up in another window if you were on your phone to give you a bit more detail about exactly what I've explained there, and also give you access to the ID guide as well. So I'm just going to go back in here. So I won't go through the 2 different species list survey. All the species list survey does in addition is just ask you how long you're there for. So if you're at your tiny forest doing a weeding event and you might be there, or you're there with a group of friends sitting having a picnic, you can be doing a butterfly survey just while you're sitting around. So you can click you just choose the time you started, the time you arrived, the time you finish, so we know how long you're looking for. And then you can just click, yep, I saw this species. You don't need to count them. So it's just, yes, while I was in the forest for an hour and a half, I saw 3 different species. So it's just more of an opportunistic thing. Even if you're only there for 5 minutes, you can record a butterfly that you saw.
I have one more question. So if I'm, for example, at the edge of the forest, so if I'm going around the perimeter, like, am I allowed to walk around, or should I just stay?
Certainly with the species list, I would recommend, yeah, you're walking around, you're doing your everyday business. With the count, mainly stay in one area, but you sometimes have to move a bit to see around. So I think, yeah, don't be too stuck to the spot, but it's better because we're asking you where you are when you did the survey. It's better to stay in generally one spot where you have a good view of a particular part of the forest. Okay.
Can we also have a look at the ID guide?
Yeah. So for the butterflies, we make use of an ID guide that's produced by Butterfly Conservation, because I don't know about if you've looked at other resources for identifying butterflies, but often you'll end up with a huge list. There are about 60 species of butterfly I think 57 species of butterfly in the UK, and it can become a bit overwhelming because there's loads of species you're not going to see in a tiny forest. You're not going to see in an urban green space, and we find that this selection of species in this guide produced by Butterfly Conservation pretty much includes the main common species that you'll see. There's a couple on here that we don't include. We don't include the brown argus because that has quite a restricted range. It doesn't occur everywhere in the UK. But it just gives you the pictures more than on the portal, where we just have the open wing picture. This includes obviously your underwing. So when they're resting and they have their wings closed, there's a different pattern. And sometimes that can be really helpful in identifying between species that may at first glance look very similar. Once they close their wings, gives you some more features to look out for. This coloration here on the painted lady's butterfly here is not present on a small tortoiseshell, for instance. So it's good to sort of have a look at those to help you identify the species that are a little bit confusing. Can't see all the windows I've opened. There we go. So for the ground dwellers and the pollinator time counts, we've actually got a new ID guide. So this will take you to our old guide. The new guide is being finalized with the designer now. I'm going to show you a sneak preview, and this will be available to you. And I think our comms team will be sending them out to you, those of you that have registered at least an electronic version of it. So I'm going to just jump to another now, and I'm going to go for the ground dwellers first. So those of you that have been to your local tiny forest will know we have concrete tiles around the forest for the ground dwellers biodiversity survey. And you can lift those tiles up and look underneath to record what is present. And this guide is trying to help you through a flow diagram, which when you glance at it, it's a bit overwhelming, but hopefully as you take it stage by stage, will be helpful for those of you that maybe feel less familiar with some of the species you might see. So we've got the pictures of the species down the bottom here. So you can just glance along and go, yeah, it's a ground beetle or an earwig, or you can help use the actual questions here that help you identify them. So first of all, how many legs do they have? Are there no legs, or are there more than 8 legs, or are there 8 legs or 6 legs? So those are your first questions. And then you just follow the questions through it's just a yes, no answer after that to take you down to whichever species that you might have seen. And these are all species groups. So we don't ask you to know what type of ground beetle it is or what type of earwig or ant it is. You just need to know it's an ant. So most people, may not even need to use this, but it just gives you a starter of the kind of range of things that we look for. And it's also quite interesting to think about how different species look, how differently their bodies are formed. Oh, I didn't know that the spiders all had a body that's clearly divided into 2 parts. So this makes it distinct from other invertebrates that we don't try to record. So hopefully you'll find those resources helpful, and we'd love to hear feedback on any of our new resources, of anything that's particularly helpful or confusing. So there'll be slight changes to this when you see it in the final version. This to give you, as I say, a sneak preview. So I'll navigate back to the portal now. So for the ground dweller survey, this really is very quick because each tile, as you know, is only small, and there should be 6 tiles in your forest, and each survey may take 2 or 3 minutes, so you can easily go around tiles in just a small space of time. The only thing that we try to encourage people with is not resurveying tiles too often, because it does disturb the creatures that are living underneath it. And if you come back after someone did it an hour ago, you may find there's not very much there. So if you do want to have a look again, you don't need to always submit the data. Submit the data from the first time you look under the tile on any day. Then you can have another look or show a child something later on, but probably don't worry about submitting the data twice within the same day. Does that make sense? So again, we ask you what your confidence is in identifying the ground dwellers, and this allows you to potentially, someone might be able to actually identify things at species level, and that might allow us to ask more detailed questions in the future if we get a lot of people who feel like they know a lot about particular groups. Now, any of you who've tried to do the biodiversity tiles survey before may have experienced problems with tiles that have gone missing, tiles that you can't find because the grass has all grown over them, or tiles that don't have numbers on. So don't be put off. We're working at ways to get the system to allow you to still take part. One of the things we found to find tiles when the undergrowth has grown over them is walk around with a stick and poke around and find them, because you hear a clonk rather than a squish. And it makes it a lot easier to find them. But as is the way with any of these projects, we're still working through certain teething troubles, and do let us know if you seem to have no tiles in your forest. Apologise that means you won't be able to take part in this survey this year out, but hopefully we can come up with a solution to that in the future. So ideally, the tiles will have a number on them, and they're numbered 1 to 6, which allows us to know which tile it is that you're surveying. And again, we want to know the conditions, because otherwise sometimes species in really hot sun will have buried themselves down, even under the tiles, buried themselves. So this time it's the other way around. In the hotter, drier conditions, many of the ground-dwelling invertebrates will bury themselves to get into the cooler, damper conditions. So it's probably quite good to go out and do your biodiversity tile survey in the cooler weather, but equally, the tile is the coolest, will be the coolest, dampest place in the forest during the wet weather. So at any time of day or year, this survey is valuable. And then, as you can see, we've got the same pictures of the different groups of the species groups that we had in the flow diagram, and exactly the same as the butterfly count survey. You just count up the number at each one that you see under the tile. And it's a little bit of a sort of a busy moment and exciting when you lift the tile up and see what's running around. So it is good to have a really quick look first with anything that's moving fast. Try and identify that and count how many. Often it's the centipedes, pretty much the centipedes that are the fastest moving. They're a carnivorous invertebrate. They eat other invertebrates, so they need to move fast to be able to catch things. So they're probably the ones that move the fastest. Some of the beetles are quite fast as well. It's also good to look at the underside of the tile, because you'll get all sorts of things that clung on or built their little nests or cocoons on the bottom of the tile as well. Again, we have an other category for anything that you see that doesn't fit into these groupings or that you can't identify. One of the distinctions that we are still trying to communicate clearly is we often find ants' nests under the tiles. It's a common woodland species, obviously, but it's also a great colonizer of newly disturbed soil. So you will find ants' nests are very common, particularly in the early years of your forest, and they can obviously occur in huge numbers. So where centipedes you count up in single individuals, in ants we count up in groups of 10, and you don't need to count every single individual. It's an estimate of how many you think might be there. But also, when you get to an ant's nest, you get eggs and you get larvae, and they're the tiny, tiny white larvae. You see the ants interacting with them and carrying them away. Often, when they think they're under threat, they all come together and try to retrieve all of their young and all of their larvae. We don't ask you to count the ant larvae. So there's a larvae category here. For this, we're talking about bigger larvae, like butterfly larvae, moth larvae, bigger, chunkier things. For the tiny white larvae, we don't, if they are present, we don't require you to count. Okay. Some people get a bit squeamish about this. It's things that scuttle and crawl, and some people find that worrying. But it's really great, even those people, to encourage them to come and have a look. They don't have to get involved. And we often find things like people particularly don't like earwigs. One of the really nice facts about earwigs is they're hugely nurturing, and they look after their young, rear their young. And it's one of those facts that makes, I think it was Jerry, Maria, in Dublin, that we convinced Jerry to like earwigs, because he was very anti them. We told him a story about how they look after their young and clean them, and most invertebrates just let their young go and just, off you go. You can hatch and rear yourself. So earwigs are very tender-hearted, I think. They get a bad rep. And then, as before, we're hopefully going to be adding a text box here for you to add anything that you see, and then just submit your data. So I will now jump to the final survey. Oops. Which is the pollinators timed count. So this one, it is worth having a look at the survey guide for this, because there are a few specific details to how we carry out the pollinator survey. This one is a survey that was designed by a national monitoring scheme. So all the different groups of wildlife have a recording scheme, a survey scheme, to try to estimate how their populations are doing. And that often requires quite a lot of specialist knowledge to do. We are working with one of the pollinator monitoring scheme, national monitoring scheme survey types. That's kind of their entry level survey. And it's called a FIT count. It's called a Flower Intensive Timed Survey, FIT. And this is asking you to look at a particular small patch of your forest and count all the pollinators that are actually interacting with the plants and the flowers that you're watching. So it's not looking across the forest like the butterfly survey. It's focusing in on a small area of flowering plants. That's why it's really good to do during April, May, when most of the flowers are available. And those flowers could be on the trees, or they could be on some of the vegetation that's growing under the trees, some of the things that might be termed as weeds. But those are the ones we don't want to pull out. They're not competing with the trees, but they're providing really important flower resources, pollen and nectar for pollinators. So it's really important to carry out this survey following those instructions and looking at this small patch and really getting into the detail and spying what's coming in and interacting with the flowers. And our pollinator challenge, pollinator survey challenge, curiosity challenge that we're setting you is to particularly go out now, April, May, when the hawthorn is flowering, because the National Pollinator Monitoring Scheme is really interested in how pollinators interact with particular flowering trees and plants. And one of the species that they have on their list is hawthorn, and so do we have hawthorn in our forest. So I really encourage you, go out and find it. If you've got hawthorn in your forest, you can check the species list on the portal page. If you've got hawthorn flowering, go out and see if it's possible to carry out a survey there, because that will be particularly valuable for us to share those data with the pollinator monitoring scheme, so we can see how hawthorn trees in tiny forests act and provide resources for butterflies, for pollinators, compared to hawthorn trees in other habitats across the country. So the same questions, again, make sure you record the date that you did the survey, where you are in the forest, and the conditions. And if you know the species of plant that is flowering that you are looking at, then you can record it here. You might not know what it is, and that's absolutely fine, not know, because there are lots and lots of wildflowers that you might be finding in your forest where it's very difficult to identify it. But we also have a guide here giving you some ideas of what it might be to help you identify it. And if any of you use any of the kind of plant ID apps, you can always have a go with that and see if it gives you any good answers that you think you're confident might represent the flowers that you are looking at. But that helps us, again, it's how the survey is aligned with the national scheme. And then obviously the amount of activity that you record will depend on how many flowers in your survey patch. So we use these just dotted diagrams to indicate there's a few flowers, half the patch, most of the patch, or no flowers. And you can just click and tick on one of these. Okay. So before I jump down, then we have the same as in the ground dwellers survey, where you have the groups, but I'm going to take you to the new ID guide first. So again, we don't ask people to record species-specific details, because many different species of honeybee, solitary bee, not honeybee, sorry, so many different species of solitary bees and bumblebees are very, very difficult to identify. So we want to know whether you're looking at either a solitary bee, a wasp, a bumblebee, or a honeybee, or a hoverfly, and then there's other pollinator groups that we also record. So there's a few distinct features that help you distinguish between these different bee and hoverfly groups. And we take you through them step by step here in the flowchart. So first of all, if you get to look at it closely enough, so obviously we have the other category. If you don't get to look at it closely enough and you're not certain, that's fine, put it in the other and unknown category. But if you can get a good look at it when you're spending your 10 minutes of survey, and you get to see whether its eyes are bulgy and far apart, or whether they are big and take up most of the head. When you start looking at these things, you can actually see this kind of detail. If they're wide apart, you want to look at the shape, the overall shape of their antennae, which are their sensor organs on the top of their heads. And if they're sort of straight, just one single line, then you go down this category. Or they might show an elbow, so they've got a distinct angle in them. And that's how you distinguish between your solitary bee and wasps and your bumblebees and honeybees. That's the really critical factor. And then finally, is it a hairy bee or a not hairy bee or wasp? And that's how you distinguish between what's called a solitary bee. So these are what the name says. They don't live in communal communities. They don't live in swarms. They might live purely individually or in pairs, only come together when they mate. And their colours can be really variable. Some of them very, very dark and tiny, but overall they're less hairy than bumblebees. They've got an elongated shape and they have this straight antenna. Whereas the wasps have the straight antenna, but they are smooth. They are not furry at all. Some of them can be very small. We think that the wasp image here is a traditional wasp that you have flying around your lemonade that you might get very annoyed about. But the wasps also come in lots of different species, and some of them can be very small and dark. But they have this narrow waist, and their legs are narrow compared to some of the bees, which collects the pollen on their legs. So they're sort of very bulgy bits on their legs. So again, you've got the group with the elbow. Then you've got to look at whether it's a round-bodied species or a slender-bodied, and that's how you can distinguish between a bumblebee and a honeybee. Okay. If you go down the other branch here, the eyes are much more close together. This is how you get to whether you're looking at a hoverfly or other types of flies. So flies have their eyes close together, bees will have their eyes wide apart. And really you're looking for behavior to identify a hoverfly from other types of flies. So they do, as they say, hover. And if you watch their behavior, they zip about rather than kind of buzzing and sort of lumbering about as flies do. They have a relatively shiny kind of surface to them, a bit more like the wasps do, but they don't have any long tongue sticking out for sucking up nectar. Whereas the flies do have that tongue. They buzz around in a bit more of a bumbling kind of way. And there's, again, many different species, but they're really important for pollination. Say 20% of British fly species are pollinators, and they can be all sorts of different shapes and sizes. And that's why we have a whole category of other flies. The other groups that we record are obviously butterflies. In this survey, butterflies and moths, we don't need you to record the species in this particular survey. It's just whether it's a butterfly or a moth. We have day-flying moths that you can find out more about if you're interested. We don't have a resource on them here yet, but you do see moths foraging in the daytime. They're not just night-flying species. Also, beetles are really good pollinators as well. Almost 25% of native UK beetles are pollinators. And what you're looking for with a beetle is this straight line down its back, which is the middle of where they join their wing case, so their armor comes together over their delicate wings. That's what protects them. That's what makes them a beetle. And finally, we have a category for small insects. So tiny things, less than 3 millimeters, that you need a microscope and usually need to dissect them to be able to identify them. So we're not going to ask you to do that, but we do want to know how many, what the role and importance of these small insects are in pollination. So have a good look. Some of them hide away inside the flowers, so make sure you have a good look. Maybe at the end of your count, have a poke about and see if you can see anything that's hiding right inside. Pollen beetles, for instance, hide inside the flower itself. So hopefully you can spend some time having a good look at those for just general interest anyway. So that when you come to do your survey, these are the groups. Again, these are bigger versions of the pictures that are on those guides. So you can see some of the features, these furry legs of the solitary bees, the difference between the leg shapes of the bees and the wasps. See, they've got much narrower straight legs compared to these kind of furry, wide legs that, particularly in the honeybee here, are large to collect the pollen. You often see them great big clumps of yellow, or even pink or blue, where they've been feeding on particular different types of pollen. And then the additional question on the pollinator surveys, just to tell us how much the actual patch you were surveying is in the sunshine. So were you, because when you start looking now, as the spring goes on, if you're standing by a patch of bramble, for instance, lots of flowers anywhere, not just in a tiny forest, the sun will come out and suddenly the patch will start buzzing. Just simply the presence of the sun makes their activity levels go up because they rely on the heat of the sun to be able to move. So it's really important after your 10-minute count to be able to say, yeah, actually most of the patch I was looking at was shaded, and that might mean that the numbers you recorded were a little bit low. And then you press submit. So that takes you through all of the surveys. Jump back to the presentation. How can you get involved? So hopefully some of you are already tree keepers. You can register on the website to receive your wildlife camp packs, which has got other activities and things to do with groups or with kids or with anyone, friends and family. Get out and monitor your local forest. Get out and start recording. Give it a go. If you're nervous and you haven't done it before, just give it a try. It doesn't matter if it goes wrong. You can always ask us questions. You can ask on the Facebook group for other members of the community who may have taken part. And you can look out for our discovery days, which are going to be taking place in tiny forests across the country. We can't go to every forest, unfortunately, but we are now aiming to get to forests, and those dates are getting in the diary and will be on the Eventbrite very soon. So even if it's not your forest where we're coming to, come and join us somewhere else. Hopefully there's one near you if you want a bit more support. And I think that leaves us with any questions. Stop. I don't know, Divya, whether there's been particular questions you've been able to respond to in the chat, or I haven't.
There's just one question on some reasons to like spiders. So if you have some fun facts about spiders, then yeah. But yeah, I think it's quite quiet on the chat side. But yeah, please feel free to unmute yourself.
Maria.
Can I just ask maybe very quickly? So I'm not aware of a tile in our tiny forest. Maybe there is, but I don't remember ones that went down.
No,
but
we highlighted it. We highlighted it with Jerry because the contractor didn't deliver them at the time. So that's
I wonder. Oh, so we'll check up on that. That's perfect.
Check up with Jerry, because the contractor, from our perspective, it was part of what the contract was supposed to do. So if there's any way to be chased, because if if we get them in soon enough before your discovery day, we can do it. Even if whenever you get them in, once they've been in a month or 6 weeks, you can do the surveys. But I think the guys at Tolkien would love to be able to do that because it's something they can do whenever they're out there. So
Yeah, no, that's perfect, because that was my question actually, that if there isn't one, if we do it now, will that make us then ready? But I was up there yesterday. I'm not aware that there's anything down, so we'd love to do it now.
I remember when we were there in September, noticing they weren't there. We told Mary, but it obviously hasn't been able to be resolved.
Lovely, thank you.
Can I ask a question?
Of course.
How long would you recommend for the what kind of time for the ground dwellers, and do you have to keep it to a specific area?
The ground dweller survey relies on these tiles being present in your forest. So it's
just the tile, just looking under the tiles, nowhere else.
Obviously, you're very welcome to look elsewhere, but the recording is based on knowing that what's under each specific tile. You should have multiple tiles, so you can do it 6.
Yes, there are definitely. All of them. Do I have to look under more?
You can do as many as you like. You can do 1, you could do 6.
Okay.
Whatever you like. And yeah, what we often do in discovery days with children, for instance, is you looked at all the tiles and they maybe want to keep looking, and that's absolutely fine. You can use the ID guide to carry on observing. But in terms of us knowing what area has been searched and what habitat those invertebrates were found in, that's why we have the control of the tile.
Right.
It provides a place where creatures come and either live or shelter or breed, but it allows us a distinct area that we are searching to be able to control for that. We've also been finding amazing things under the tiles across the forest. We've had newts already this year, mice, frogs. Trying to think what else, Divya. The newts is one of the most exciting that people have found.
And we found a slow worm in one of the spleen.
I knew there was something else, which is just fantastic. So to be able to see, for people to be able to see things like that, so you never know what might turn up. And again, that's why we're adding the other box to allow you to type in if you've seen other species. But if obviously anything you see that you're not sure about, taking photos of it and sending it in is a great idea. Certainly with the tile survey, if you lift the tile up and take a photo, it's good to look and count and do it, but you can always look back at the photo and check what's like this.
We have a question in the chat from Ginny about resources. So do you want just she asked, are there any resources on the website about the species, maintenance, and longevity of the tiny forest? She's a garden designer, so interested in understanding more from the design perspective.
Yeah. So are you talking mainly, Ginny, about the tree species that we plant and the way the forest is maintained?
Yes, yeah, and how you get it started off without brambles taking over, or or whether you do any watering at all in the first year or 2. Yeah. And also what the life expectancy is of these little forests. Yeah, thank you. So we there are resources. So Divya, you can direct towards sort of the guidance on the weeding, the maintenance, so guidance on the role of weeding, the importance of weeding. Some of them more big competitive things like brambles, thistles, docks, but obviously the balance between leaving those species of wildflowers and grasses that actually have value to biodiversity. So we do have those kind of resources. In terms of the overall method of the Miyawaki forest, it's something that we've got other webinars about, and we can send you some reading. I can send you, maybe Jenny would be interested in the paper that we've got from the Quarterly Journal of Forestry, which kind of outlines the principles by which we develop each forest. Basically, they are long-term interventions. They are meant to stay and live on into 20, 30, 40, 50 years, we obviously hope. But part of the point of our monitoring is to understand the species diversity and density evolves over time. So this density of planting is obviously contrary to many tree planting methods, but it's about, we see it as a rapid development of the system rather than 600 trees and shrubs that will survive for 50 years. So obviously there will be natural thinning, but we don't do any maintenance, we don't do any thinning, because the principle of the method is to see how it evolves naturally and allow deadwood to lie. And ultimately, the forests that are the oldest in Europe are about 8 or 9 years old in the Netherlands, but there are forests that are 25, 30, 40 years old in Japan and elsewhere in the world, which are flourishing, but there's actually relatively little systematic data collected
to tell us what the overall survival rate is. About 2 papers that have a few examples, but they're very specific, arid Mediterranean conditions, which I don't think necessarily to what we have in the UK. So if you're interested in more, have a look at the links that Vivia's shared in the paper. And the paper is very much a description of the methods behind and the principles of the tiny forest planting method. But we are in year 3 now, the data collection, understanding how the forests grow. So still early days, but we're beginning to, if you look at the monitoring report, sort of see some of the indications of how that's developed.
Thank you, that's really helpful.
Cheers. Oh, loads of ladybirds, George. That's wonderful. I think we've certainly had them in the house a lot this year. There's a lot of I think it's because it's been so mild that they've been able to overwinter, and they may be coming out in larger numbers at this time of year because more of them have overwintered rather than being sort of dying off during the cold weather, which we just haven't experienced at all this year.
Mm-hmm.
There are other there are many other citizen science opportunities for recording species, and if you're particularly interested in butterflies, for instance, you can Google about ladybird count apps and other sources of other activities you can do. We are limiting what we are doing to the specific surveys that I outlined today, but that absolutely doesn't mean you can't get involved in other schemes, and we'd be really interested if you're someone who's an aphid enthusiast and you want to know more about aphids in tiny forests, let us know. We'd be fascinated to hear.
Amazing. Any other questions? See, we are bang on.
Bang on time.
Yeah.
It's almost like we planned it. It's all thanks to my lovely colleague Georgie who prepared the slides. I just waffle my way through. Thank you all so much for coming, and we'd love to hear if you go out and give it a try and hear how you get on. There's a month before the actual wildlife count week. As I say, million acts of science. It'd be really lovely if people could get out during April as well, just to try it out and see, and then maybe you'll feel more confident for wildlife count. And just keep us. And if you have any other questions, please, once you've gone out once and tried it, and you sort of go, oh, actually, I didn't understand it, then give us a shout.
Yeah, I put in the email ID, so it's tinyforest@earthwatch.org.uk. So yeah, give us a shout if you have any questions that pop up or any other suggestions on how to make this better, because again, we want to identify barriers that people might have to all of these. So if you have suggestions, we want to make sure it works for you. So yeah, just please keep the feedback coming.
If you know of any other people or groups, local scout groups or youth groups who might be interested in taking part, direct people to us who might want a little bit more information, or encourage them to go and join you in the forest. That would be really fun.
Oh, one last question. If I manage to get some kids involved, do you have like a pack that I could use? It's just that I don't have a printer, and it would be nice to give them sheets with the pictures on there and stuff. You know what I mean?
What I could do is I can ask one of our colleagues to print it out for you and mail it across, post it to you. Is that okay?
That would be fabulous. Yeah.
Lovely. If you can email to Tiny Forest with your address, what I'll do is I'll ask one of my colleagues to kind of print out some of these forms, ID guides, and then
so that we could do the biodiversity with some kids. I think there are only 2 kids, but
just a couple of copies. It all makes a difference when they're able to hold something in there.
Yeah, maybe 4 copies, because maybe the mum and myself could do it. Yeah, that would be nice. Thank you very much, Divya. I'll email you my address. Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Lovely.
Okay.
Thanks for joining.
Goodbye, everyone. Have
Bye.
fun.
See you.
Take care.
Bye. Bye-bye, everyone. Bye.